What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We're here with some more PGA DFS picks and lineup advice for DraftKings and FanDuel. This time for the Waste Management Phoenix Open. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, and I'm joined by fellow six-figure PGA winner and our PGA analyst at OccupyFantasy.com, Niromada. Niro, it's been like 12 weeks of January seemingly, but we're finally in February and on to the Waste Management and Super Bowl week.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is a great event. It's a lot of fun. Probably, certainly one of the top two to three non-major events of the year, with the way they've turned it out with the crowd and the Super Bowl lead up and everything. So looking forward to this one. It's a fun one this week.
Me too, as well. So, what we're going to do in this video, if you are a returning viewer, you know what the schedule looks like. We will review last week's plays. We always talk about transparency and what we can learn from previous events. And the first few events of the year, we've been pretty spot on, and we've been happy to talk about this section. Not so great last week, but we're still going to talk about it because, again, we want to be transparent. We want to see what we can learn. Two, we'll talk about the top plays in our Occupy model for this week's waste management event. We'll look at which players will be highly owned or more highly owned in high stakes and smaller high dollar contests. And then we'll talk about some early market movers as well as maybe a showdown or weather tip. So make sure you stick around to the end for that. So last week, Nero, not a banner week for the model and not necessarily a banner week for our daily plug as well. We did have Shane Lowry in the top 10. You called out Cam Davis in the daily plug, although we did break our streak of calling out the winner 2 weeks in a row. No Rory in the plug last week, but these things happen from time to time. I'm asking you. I sifted through the data this morning, didn't see anything that really stood out to me too much. But was it the weather last week? Was it the pro-am aspect, the course rotation, or pure variance? In your mind, what do you think we got wrong last week?
Yeah, well, first of all, we talked about a little bit last week when you have these multi-course events, you have a little more variance. Throw in amateur partners for a couple of the rounds, a little bit more variance. You had some very intense weather for about 36 hours, probably when it's all said and done for this event, adds even more variance to it. So healthy dose of variance. Me personally, I don't have the best record still yet in these signature events, so I feel like I'm still trying to get a handle on these. So that is not great from my own personal perspective. And then if I look at this one specifically, the way I tried to attack the contest this week was I tried to attack the top of the field with Morikawa and Cantlay, and that led me to a slightly more balanced build. I wasn't too far off, but you had to have McIlroy and Lowry to attack, and not Cantlay and Morikawa. And my proverbial goose was cooked from that strategic decision forward.
Yeah, but to be fair to you too, like I had many lineups with Rory and Shane Lowry, and I still didn't have that great of a week because I missed the bottom of the player pool. So
Yeah.
that is tough. Even if you hit the top or the top two even on these signature events when you can't get leverage over the field with players missing cuts, it's a lot harder to get to the top of leaderboards. And as we see on weeks with cuts, right, we really move up the leaderboard when we have a 6 out of 6 or sometimes even a 5 out of 6. But that movement is much more incremental over the weekend on signature events.
Yeah, when the field is compacted like that, you just don't move as much, unless you really have it nailed. You and I have talked many times throughout the years about how frustrating it is when you like get the lower owned stuff right and then the chalk that you have busts and it doesn't do well. So I mean, as always, you need all facets to come together for you to do well. And that pressure, quote unquote, is compacted on the signature events week because you can't get leverage just by having guys make the cut.
That is exactly right. So let's look at this week's event, the Waste Management Phoenix Open out there at TPC Scottsdale. Now, I am wearing the DraftKings hat because I do want to give a shout out to them. They allowed me to play Scottsdale about a year and a half ago when I was out there for the football live final. And Nero, by no means am I a good golfer whatsoever, but I got to say, these greens will be a stark contrast to the greens that you and I have been talking about the past couple of weeks. So with the POA, these are like putting on carpet. I mean, if I can make as many putts as I did at Scottsdale, I know these pro golfers will have no issues. And that shows up in some of the metrics we look for at this course.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, good luck to anyone that's watching that has a King of the Desert ticket and they're out there this week playing live in those contests. Uh, for either golf or football. And again, that's part of what makes this week fun and makes it a great week. Yeah, this course tends to be more of a ball striker course. It's not defended by the elements like Pebble Beach is. It's be much closer to like the American Express or what we see in the fall in Las Vegas, like very traditional desert target specific golf. And yeah, great greens. You can make a lot of putts. You can make a lot of putts on these greens, but really, this is a ball strikers event. Like you need to be able to not disperse your shots widely, keep them in a narrow range, and be able to attack the pins and the correct segments of the greens. These greens are segmented, and so you really need to be able to get close to the right segment so that you can have decent birdie looks throughout the day.
Yeah, and it's funny when I was out there playing. When you're out there, they give you a caddy, and if I would miss the fairway by a little bit, he would say, "Oh, it's fine. You know what? That shot's totally fine." Shout out to Franz, our caddy. But if I did miss pretty wide, which was relatively often, he would say, "Nope, that's gone. That's in the desert," or "Nope, that's gone. That's in the neighborhood." So yeah, hopefully the pro golfers can avoid those wider misses. But there are guys on tour who miss wide sometimes, and they will be penalized at this course, and that does reflect in our model. So we look at this week, Nero. Let's talk about the number one guy. It should be the number one guy in every single person's model ever this week. It's Scotty Scheffler, and Nero, he ranks basically first in every important category for this event. Let's talk about game theory. What are we going to do with him? Because right now our Occupy model very conservatively projects 33% projected ownership. I know for a fact that will not be the case because he was 38% last week and he fits better this week, and he got the rust shaken off from his hand injury in the offseason. I would not be shocked if he's 50% plus in most contests. So what do we do with him? I know you've said the past couple of weeks that your bankroll was better last year when you started to stop fading Scotty Scheffler. What do we do with him at this ownership on such a great course fit?
My natural instinct as a longtime DFS player is to fade him or not fade him, but find a way to get under the field. Um, I just he's just so good, and it makes me sick. But I think the most responsible thing you could do in that is go very heavy on him in low risk and smaller field contests, maybe even locking him in those contests. And then if you want to take bigger shots in larger field, do something that's maybe like half of what the field. So let's say you think he's going to be 45 something percent, maybe 50% even. Okay, well then get 20% exposure to him, 25%. He doesn't kill you. If he wins, you still have a decent amount of lineups, but you're banking on him going underperforming, we'll say. And if he overperforms and he wins, you still have some in the large field stuff, and your small field and cash stuff should be in really good shape. So I think that's the most responsible way to play it. Obviously, if you have bigger risk tolerances or you're more aggressive, you can go much further over, or you can even go much further over, lock him into like 70, 80% of all of your lineups everywhere. Um, but yeah, I think that's the correct game theory play is to real heavy in smaller contests and underneath the field on him in large field.
And I will say, I think where you decide to go with Scheffler this week should solely lie in your comfort level and your confidence in both lower salary guys and lower owned guys. And our model is highlighting some at near the very top. We'll talk about here in a second. But whether it's the betting market or whatever else you are reading or looking at, Nero, if there are a bunch of guys, or at least a couple of guys that you feel very confident in that are low owned, low salary to help you fit Scheffler in and get different, then I think that should lead you to playing more Scheffler. If you're just looking, you're like, I really can't find that many guys that I like that are lower salary or lower owned. A lot of the other guys I like are higher owned. That's going to lead you to playing less Scheffler just because of how we build lineups in PGA DFS.
Totally agree. For everyone listening, that's a perfect example of what makes Brian so good at DFS and these types of games. It's a great way to think about it. You can embrace chalk. I mean, think about it like a MLB stack, right? Like you can take the chalkiest MLB stack, but one way to get different within that chalky team is to include some low owned hitters within that maybe the field is not including. Gives you exposure to the Yankees, for example, but you don't have the same 5-4 hitters that everyone else has. Maybe you have two of those, but then you've got three other players that not everyone else has. It's a great way to think about being able to get exposure to Scheffler, but still being diversified and still having unique paths to the top. if he does well.
That's a very good way to look at it as well, and appreciate the compliments as always. All right, let's move on to the other top guys in our model. The rest of the top 10 in our model. Nero, the next three guys in our model for this event have shown up in the top 10 pretty much at every event they've played so far in January. And while they haven't spiked yet, JJ Spawn spiked in 1 week in the Sony Open, but these other guys, they haven't killed your lineups. And again, we're still looking for the putting variance to turn on most of these guys, but it's Doug Gim, Keith Mitchell, and JJ Spawn. And again, if you've been watching the model all year, you've maybe saying these guys again, but if they're this cheap and this low owned and they're making cuts and not killing your lineups and they still haven't ceiled yet to what the model thinks is going to happen. And I will say there's been many times in the past, especially in PGA DFS, where a guy keeps ranking highly in the model and eventually he busts through and wins. There's a Lucas Glover moment, other guys that fit this bill for the model in the past. So Nero, Gim, Mitchell, Spawn, they show up again. Obviously the ball striking is going to be a key common denominator here for these three, but why else might the model be looking at these three as great plays this week?
Yeah, well, let's just use Doug Gim as an example for all three of these players. So Gim last week was 68th, right? Almost, very close to last. There was 80 whatever players last week. But when you look at his stats, he was 14th in the field in strokes gained tee to green, and he was 78th in strokes gained putting. So almost dead last in putting. He was 12th here last year. So he's got course success. He's playing very well. Again, playing very well in air quotes there. Not putting very well. But again, we just talked about how you don't need to be a great putter on this course. You would certainly prefer to be a great ball striker over a great putter. So you get some of that putting regression back to the mean in your favor this week. He continues to strike the ball well, which he has so far this year, and especially last week, throwing a dash of positive course history from last year. And there you go. You get someone who ranks very highly in the model, is overlooked by the field, and that's the type of play, that you're looking for high risk contests, which is what the model is great at identifying.
Yeah, and right now we haven't projected sub 10% ownership, and I think the same applies for Keith Mitchell and Spawn as well. Let's monitor that ownership throughout the week. 2 points, Nero, to what you mentioned there. One is the putting, and as you and I have said, the past couple of events on that tricky West Coast POA surfaces, it can be difficult. Some guys just cannot putt on it. Some guys don't have the experience on it. And now this is a completely different event. So you basically have to throw out the window any putting stats from the past two events. And really, you should be doing that anyways because it's such a volatile aspect of the game. So that should be included as a positive for a game here. But you mentioned course history, and there's different courses on PGA that course history actually matters. You have to get to know the course. Some, it doesn't matter whatsoever. And you think about the ultimate example, right? Like Augusta, right? That's a course where you have to play a few times to typically to play well eventually. You wouldn't really think of TPC Scottsdale as one of those courses, but Nero, it has one of the higher correlations of course history to future performance than any course on tour.
Yeah, so you have the ball striking piece, but again, I like to be digging in below the numbers, and I actually think that it's more event history here than course history almost because this is what like the most unique week on tour for these guys. They play in front of more people, with more noise, with more distractions, with more everything than any other week that they have all year. That includes the majors, by the way. This is like unquestionably the closest thing there is to like stadium golf where you have 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 people standing around watching you play. It's a very different, for anyone who plays golf knows, like that's a very different situation than just your run of the mill tour event. So I definitely give a little bit extra to guys who have at least shown up, who have proven that they can show well here in the past, because that tells me they either can handle the environment or they like it. And that's something I'm trying to keep extra attention on a week like this.
For those of you who play golf, just imagine the feeling of the group ahead of you says, "Hey guys, you can play through," and they're watching you on the tee box as you play through. But imagine that with 5,000 drunken people shouting at you while you play through. That is the experience, Nero, that these guys will go through, especially on was it 16, the par three with the stadium.
16. Yep. Yep.
So yeah. So just imagine that in your brain, and if these guys can play through that, they will thrive at this course in this event. particularly. All right, Nero, next guy is in our model, Hideki. Not too surprising here as a top guy. But and you can hit on Hideki if you want, but the other guys that pop up next that are somewhat surprising to me, maybe not one of them after last week's performance, is Carson Young, Lucas Glover, and Joel Damon. Why don't you talk about why these guys rate so highly in our model?
Well, Glover obviously is a great course fit, but you have specifically Young and Glover rate very well in off the tee in these types of courses, and Damon great in approach on these types of courses. Now, as you mentioned earlier, this is desert golf. It's target golf. So contrast it to like a U.S. Open. U.S. Open, you miss the fairway by 30 yards. Like you are often on another hole, but maybe in another fairway, and you still have a shot to get over the trees to get close to the green. This type of golf, you miss the fairway by 15 yards. You're in the desert. You're in the rocks. You're in the cactus whatever, like wide misses on these types of places are more penalized than they are at other events. Even on harder golf courses, wide misses are not as penalized as they are here. So we look, the guys that often play well here and who show up well in models here are guys who don't have as wide of misses in their shot dispersion. So Young, Glover, Damon would all qualify in that realm.
Yeah, that's very interesting to think about. And again, if you don't play golf or you don't model golf, you may not think about it like that, but it is a really interesting way, and it does prove to be predictive depending on the course that you are playing on. Finally, closing out the top 10 of our models, Sung J M, solid across the board. That should be no surprise. And finally, Sam Stevens, Nero, who showed up at Torrey Pines a couple of weeks ago. He's another guy that the models liked pretty much all season so far, and he's produced for us, and it's looking to produce again this week.
He looks very good in miles, and truthfully, if you look through his finishes, he's definitely a player on the rise, even though he's not like a young gun type of player. Makes a lot of birdies, doesn't make a ton of bogeys. That's a great recipe for success right there. And outstanding driver of the golf ball. Has a nice combination of distance and accuracy. Leads to him gaining a lot of strokes off the tee. 17th at Pebble, second at the Farmers, so he's playing well, and he was sixth at the Worldwide Technology in Mexico back in November. So he's got a good bank of form, like some very recent form, and even within the last couple months, he's not going to be the most consistent player because he still hasn't reached that point in his career, and maybe he never will. But for a week like this, certainly worth some exposure.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on and let's talk about which golfers we expect to be higher owned in one high dollar contest or two smaller GPPs that pros can still play, so $3 or higher on both DraftKings and FanDuel. And how do we determine this? We look at industry projections. Nero and I have studied this for years now. We know which projections from which sources bump ownership up for these guys. And as we've said every week so far in these videos, if you're playing high dollar stuff, know that these guys will be more popular, and you can either look to avoid them or just, depending on the rest of the construction of your lineup, play them, or just understand how highly owned they will be compared to our ownership projections. Or if you're not subscribed to our site or any other site, you have no access to PGA DFS projections, you're just looking at betting markets and whatever else you read, these guys are probably good plays if you're playing less than $3 contests that pros cannot play in. Their ownership will not reflect their actual projection in those contests. Nero, this week, obviously, it's going to be Scotty Scheffler, I imagine. But who else? Let's start with DraftKings. Who else that we might open a high dollar GPP on Thursday and say, wow, this guy was higher than the model projected?
Yeah, you have two similar lists actually for DraftKings and FanDuel. We'll go DraftKings first. Scheffler, obviously number one for both lists. Actually, as you mentioned above, certainly a great candidate to be above the projected ownership this week, and specifically in high stakes contests. And then the rest of the list: Billy Horschel, Patrick Rogers, Austin Eckroat, and JJ Spawn. Horschel makes a ton of sense as he's got a great combination of recent form. He was great last week, especially his ball striking, and course form. He's been very good over the last, I don't know, five or so years, I think, at this event. So I mean, he makes a ton of sense, and I would expect him to show well in models, and therefore really show well in excuse me, in the higher dollar contests. Over on FanDuel, very similar list: Scheffler, Horschel, Austin Eckroat, Doug Kim. So we talked about Kim earlier, but he's got a much more palatable price point on FanDuel, which is going to make him higher owned over there. And then the one who's not on the DraftKings list, Chris Kirk.
Interesting. Very interesting list. And we always like to see some overlap here between the model and this list as well. So we had Doug Game here. We have JJ Spawn over on DraftKings. And again, your risk tolerance, the size of your contest, all the line of construction rules that Nero puts in the daily plug will determine whether or not you play these guys or some of these guys or all these guys or none of these guys in your small field or high stakes GPP lineups. And again, as we've said the last couple of weeks, we record this Tuesday morning or early afternoon. It is still too early to determine accurate ownership. Therefore, we can't really determine should we pivot away from these cheaper guys until the ownership finalizes and settles in Wednesday evening. So make sure you check back to the daily plug and our Occupy model as well as our lineup builder to determine which guys are lower or higher owned and are cheaper and potentially riskier that we can get away from in tournaments to play some of those lower owned guys that we mentioned just a few minutes ago. Nero, we have no trifecta plays just yet, which are guys who their odds to win have moved at every single sharp sportsbook that we monitor. We have a handful of guys that have moved at a couple sportsbooks, and we're keeping an eye on them. Denny McCarthy was on this list last week. Obviously, that didn't work out very well. But more often than not, the guys who are on these types of betting market moves lists are pretty good DFS plays. Who have you seen move so far? And is there any common thread or any common metric or course history that we're looking at in these early movers?
So here's my list as it stands right now: Rasmus Højgaard, Thomas Dietrich, Mackenzie Hughes, Patrick Rogers, Kurt Kitayama, Sepp Straka, and Austin Eckroat. So you at least have three of those: Straka, Eckroat, and Højgaard, who played well last week. The rest of them, I couldn't really, to be honest, pick out like a great theme here. Usually, you would see like great ball strikers will catch steam in
Yeah.
events like this because they are so correlated to success here. But for this crew so far, yeah, I don't. I'm not seeing anything that is making me like, oh, well, the common thread here is blah. I don't just don't see it.
Yeah, I don't see it either. So it's kind of tough to figure out what's going to happen. But again, it's only Tuesday. Let's see what happens by Wednesday evening, and maybe a common thread will appear. Because there have been times in the past where we try to figure out moves early in the week, and then you come in with your Wednesday update and the plug on the site, and it's like, oh wow, all the distance guys got moves, or all the around the
Yes.
greens guys got moves, and it's like, oh, someone or at least some group has some information on how this course is going to be playing, at least differently than how maybe we initially expected.
Yeah, that's usually through either having people on the ground at the event or guys giving away information in the press conferences that they hold on Tuesday and Wednesday. So giving insight about how the course is playing in practice rounds or that kind of thing, and then you'll see some correlated steam to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, which is why it's important to continue to tweak and look at your lineups all the way through even Thursday morning when we have these West Coast events because we get more information at our fingertips. So, all right, before we get out of here, we will talk about any potential showdown or weather notes. Before we do, make sure you're subscribed to our channel here on YouTube. Last week, we passed 1,100 views, which was more than our goal to continue this series throughout the summer, the spring and summer. So we got to keep doing that. So if you want to keep seeing these videos, make sure you watch the video all the way through to the end. Click subscribe. It's free to do so. Give us a thumbs up. It's free to do so. Drop a comment. It's free to do so. 4 different free ways to help us keep making these videos. It's really easy to do. So we appreciate your help. It's mutually beneficial. But Nero, for as far as showdown or weather, the past couple of weeks we talked about course rotations. We talked about potential weather last week. Anything stand out for this particular event as to showdown or classic, whether it's weather, anything that an edge that may materialize?
Not that I see right now. If you look at the wind forecast for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I mean, there's almost no sustained wind above 5 miles an hour, and there's no double figure gusts anywhere. Like they're basically playing in a dome, so I don't think there's any advantage. I mean, you have probably the dual advantage. Well, the split thing of the guys that play in the morning. The greens are more pure, less traffic, but it's colder, especially in the desert. by the afternoon, it's warmed up, the ball's going further. So, I probably will give a slight edge to the afternoon players in both on both days in showdowns, just because they're going to have warmer conditions and ball flights that they're more used to, despite the fact that they'll have greens be a little bit more trafficked. But as you mentioned, Brian, from your own time playing there, the greens here are very pristine and they handle traffic well. So that's probably where I would lean a little bit, but nothing I'm going to play very heavily.
Always a good nugget. If that changes, don't worry because Nero will put it in the daily plug. OccupyFantasy.com is where he writes up his favorite plays every week. He writes up lineup construction tips for different contest types on both FanDuel and DraftKings. He gives betting market moves, course analysis, way more in depth than we go here, weather updates, and then final betting market moves on Wednesday afternoon. So if you're not a member already, make sure you check out OccupyFantasy.com. Link is in the description for Nero's daily plug, as well as the model we've referenced earlier in the show, as well as our projected ownership to go with our lineup builder. Allows you to build 300 lineups or up to 300 lineups using our model ratings, our ownership, and all the rules that Nero puts in the daily plug. It's one of the best recipes for success in PGA DFS. And we encourage you to check it out to get that extra edge and join us in our Discord to chat with other like-minded members of the PGA DFS community. So for Nero, I'm Brian. Appreciate everyone listening. Again, make sure you're subscribed, like, and drop a comment to see these videos continue. We appreciate you. Good luck and enjoy the Waste Management Phoenix Open.